My association with Baba that resulted in my giving talks always raised a very difficult dilemma. When I first heard about Meher Baba by receiving God Speaks, I knew with complete conviction who he was. I didn't know that much about the spiritual hierarchy or all the things that I subsequently learned from Baba, but I knew that he was the authority in creation. And later Baba confirmed that when I started writing to him about a long association, which is what I do believe all of us here have the greatest good fortune to share. And all I want to do is to somehow say those things that awaken you and myself to how very fortunate we are. Because living, and particularly today, is very distracting, and when we are all included in that rare condition of having the awareness that God in fact exists and to actually know the real God-man is the greatest fortune that anyone could ever have. But to realize that fortune is our work. We are eternal, but our consciousness doesn't know that. And that's what Baba stresses, and that's what I'm trying to share with you. What my struggle with Baba has enabled me to see with increasing clarity. But before sharing my thoughts, I would like to read Baba's universal message, because I've done that a number of times. And when I read his message, what I have in my mind is these are the words of God in human form. And that's what thrills me. The words are beautiful for the intellect, but that's not it. It's the conviction that the author of these words is saying that to us and to subsequently posterity. But to us, we are Baba's eyes, his ears, his voice. And Baba's wish is that we make our lives his message of love and truth. That's our work. I have come not to teach, but to awaken. Understand, therefore, that I lay down no precepts. Throughout eternity, I have laid down principles and precepts, but mankind has ignored them. Man's inability to live God's words makes the Avatar's teaching a mockery. Instead of practicing the compassion he taught, man has waged crusades in his name. Instead of living the humility, purity, and truth of his words, man has given way to hatred, greed, and violence. Because man has been deaf to the principles and precepts laid down by God in the past, in this present avataric form, I observe silence. You have asked for and been given enough words. It is now time to live them. To get nearer and nearer to God, you have to get further and further away from I, my, me, and mine. You have not to renounce anything but your own self. It is as simple as that, though found to be almost impossible. It is possible for you to renounce your limited self by my grace. I have come to release that grace. I repeat, I lay down no precepts. When I release the tide of truth which I have come to give, men's daily lives will be the living precept. The words I have not spoken will come to life in them. I veil myself from man by his own curtain of ignorance and manifest my glory to a few. My present avataric form is the last incarnation of this cycle of time. Hence, my manifestation will be the greatest. When I break my silence, the impact of my love will be universal, and all life in creation will know, feel, and receive of it. It will help every individual to break himself free from his own bondage in his own way. I am the divine beloved who loves you more than you can ever love yourself. The breaking of my silence will help you to help yourself in knowing your real self. All this world confusion and chaos was inevitable, and no one is to blame. What had to happen has happened, and what has to happen will happen. There was and is no way out, except through my coming in your midst. I had to come, and I have come. I am the Ancient One. Jai Baba. Before I heard about Meher Baba, I had the very compelling preoccupation with all the normal attitudes and limitations of anyone. I had the continuing preoccupation of needing to find meaning in life that was worth putting up with everything that I would become aware of and what each of you would become aware of. I had that need. Much later, I began to realize that need was the divinity in me, just as the divinity in each of us looks for beautiful things. That is the evidence of the divinity. So with that need, I kept trying to comprehend what it was I could understand from my experience growing up that was evidence of some great meaning. And the greatest thing I was able to see that did satisfy me were the qualities of a truly noble and beautiful human being. That meant so much to me. That was a realization that there was meaning. And in the course of that lifted me up. I wanted to know how to become like that. We all know what a beautiful, noble human being is now, far more definitively from what we've learned from the Avatar himself. The nobility of a life supremely lived and that sort of thing. Peace untroubled by ambition, a knowledge undimmed by illusion, a power unused except for others, a love unmixed with desire. These are things that every one of us, no matter how limited we are, we can recognize it. And when we recognize it, we admire it. We don't envy it, we admire it. You envy somebody who has something that you would like to have in the illusory world, whether it's fame, whether it's fortune, whether it's talent that gets the admiration of people From Baba, we learn what an incredible journey we have been on. We have always existed before this journey because God has always existed, and that's all that exists. We learn this, but how do we apply it in the day-to-day lives that I would say we are compelled to live, but we have the good fortune to live? Good fortune because there is no other way to come finally to the experience of your own real nature, which we all share in common. So in trying to determine what I needed to do to move in the direction of what I could admire, I would examine my thoughts, my motives for everything that I did. Every thought I would examine. This was not observable by anybody else. I was struggling to find out where I was and what I needed to do to be what I found out was evidence of magnificent meaning in life, a beautiful human being. And I found out that most of my motives had to do with my own pleasure, my own relief from boredom. And so I started doing those things that logically would seem to discipline myself from constantly seeking that type of relief or that type of enjoyment or that type of pseudo-security, however you would call it. And in the course of that, it was a struggle, yes. But the realization that there was meaning and that there was another way that I could move in the direction that was so compelling and magnificent if I were to imagine it in another. And I would see individuals that I thought had those qualities, or I would read about people. And so in doing that, I began to discipline myself in certain ways, giving up the things that I liked. And the result of, but I was doing it for this admirable thing. Now, who is the greatest individual of all? That was later, way down later. I didn't know that these were God qualities in people, you know. The explanation of the mechanics of spiritual growth and awakening and realization, that came later when Baba came on the scene. So I was moving in that direction, and I could feel within myself the benefit. I was feeling different. And I'd struggle on and on like that. And I really didn't get anything that I can recall out of religion. I was in the Eastern Orthodox Christian faith. That's from my family. But I don't recall anything. I'm sure culturally something like that, be good, don't be bad, or whatever. I'm sure those things were there. But you see, that was not enough to cope with all of the things that I see going on. I needed to know that no matter what happened, there was something that made it okay, that made all that happened of no consequence compared to this great something. And that's what I found. And so I knew that I was moving in the right direction. I was not comparing myself with anyone. I didn't know who felt this way or whether they felt this way at all. I could see people I admired, yes. I knew I was improving over what I was, little by little. And that was enough for me to know that there was meaning, and I was going in that direction. Then little by little, you know, it occurs to you, as I like Baba's phrase, the logic of experience. It occurs to you, if I've made this improvement, there's got to be people way down there. And then I began to find out from reading, philosophy was a little bit abstract. Certain philosophers seemed to be toying with the nobility of human character. But that was not the direct approach. I became aware of a person through someone I knew when I was in college. And from the knowledge of the sister of this person that I was in school with at William and Mary, I finally met her. And I was told something about her in terms of something she said that sounded very much like what I was looking for. And the person to whom she told this was my cousin that lived in Richmond, Virginia. It was a very beautiful girl. But her beauty and her did not go to her ego or her head. She was the fairest kind of person. So anything that impressed her, I said, had to be something really good. But she couldn't tell me anything about it. I finally met this girl by accident. And it turns out, this was in Richmond, and the only reason that I knew her, she was walking down on a Saturday downtown Richmond with two men. And one of the men was a person I was in school with at William and Mary. And then he introduced me, and I knew that the person that my cousin had told me about was the sister of this man. Then we were introduced. Well, because of the two men there, I didn't want to say anything. So I said, now at least I know she's in town. So we went and had coffee, and then we split up. I did not know that she was leaving the next day for Paris, where she was taking some advanced degree in, I think, architecture at the Sorbonne. That same afternoon, I was walking down the same street and she was alone. And so, of course, then I said I felt I could approach her. And I did approach her, and she told me about Dr. Walter Russell. Any of you heard of that man? Dr. Walter Russell, Swannanoa, Virginia, a man who had never been to school, and said God was his teacher or something. Well, she called me and she said, she told me about that. She said, I'll see if and then I found out she was leaving for Paris the next morning. She said, I will see if I have anything, any literature. She called me that night. She said I'd given everything away. So she gave me the address, and I ended up going up there. Dr. Walter Russell was an amazing man. He had an experience that lasted 30 days. He had never gone to school. He proved himself in the world in science. He showed where the atomic table, the Mendeleev table that we studied at school was incomplete. He showed exactly how the creation was composed. Became president of the Academy of Arts and Sciences. They were going to honor Thomas Edison. The person that they were going to commission to do a bust of Edison was already working. So Dr. Russell said, everyone has this ability. He said, I'll do it myself. He had never sculpted before. And yet he became famous. He became the sculptor to the Roosevelt family. His bust of Roosevelt is in Churchill's home. He did the Four Freedoms at the United Nations, the Colin Kelly Memorial, the Mark Twain Memorial, all of these things. Never had been to school. So I did go there. It seemed far-fetched, but I ended up going at the top of Afton Mountain outside of Waynesboro, Virginia, this big marble mansion where he lived. And the upshot of the whole thing was he only recommended 2 books. He was an amazing man. He was in his 80s then. He kept his pulse at 40. He could paint. He'd make his hands would move like that, and then he'd just keep everything still. He had all of those things that we would be impressed with. But he recommended only 2 books. One was Cosmic Consciousness by a psychiatrist from Canada, Richard Maurice Buck. The other was the Bhagavad Gita. I got the Bhagavad Gita. I got both of the books. The Bhagavad Gita that I bought, the introduction was by Aldous Huxley. And Aldous Huxley, I found, was a member of the editorial board of the Vedanta Society in Southern California. So I got all of these books on Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, the Upanishads, and I read everything. So I was finding out that this something that I felt existed was always known. So that's how And the translations of the Ramakrishna, the Gospel of Ramakrishna and the other things, the translations were done by Swami Nikolananda in New York City. Adele, you know about him. So I wrote to him and I said, I'm tired of reading about the reality that I am convinced exists. I must meet someone who experiences it. He wrote me back and he said, one such as Ramakrishna comes along, perhaps once in 500 years. There isn't any question about that. What a marvelous opportunity if you had that opportunity. But it is not necessary for your spiritual growth. He said, I am going to Paris. Another guy's going to Paris. I'll be back in September. You must come to see me. So, in the meantime, someone that my wife had grown up with in Williamsburg, where she was from, Virginia, you may know her, Elizabeth Sakalis. She came down and I told her everything that I was experiencing. And I'd have these moments when something really quite beautiful I was feeling. And I told her everything that I had found out. And she said she went back to New York walking on clouds. And she was a very genuine kind of person. She wasn't interested in trivia. She liked sports. She could do even mechanical things like fix automobiles. She worked in a woman's prison for a while, I believe. Things like that. And her father was supplying her with money, so she didn't need to work. So she went back, and as a thank you, she sent me this book that she found off Broadway as a present to thank me for everything that I had told her. And the name of the book was God Speaks. So I got the book at my office, and I opened, I saw the picture, I read the inside of the paper cover. I picked up the telephone. It was 10 or 11 o'clock. Yes.
Henry, are you saying that God Speaks opened off Broadway?
It was a bookstore off Broadway, I believe it was. It may have been Samuel Weiser. I don't remember now. But it was the first place where that book was. It had just been published in 55. And I have to tell Bob about that. That was a real coincidence, Bob. Anyway, so I picked up the telephone and called her. Her name was Elizabeth. I called her Liz. I said, Liz, thank you very much for the book. He is the one. Find out how we can meet him. So then we waited impatiently, my wife and I. She finally, I think we called her. She said she had gone to the publishing company, which was Dodd Mead in New York. They said Meher Baba had been here in 1952. They did not expect him back. So then I wrote him a special delivery airmail letter. They didn't have special delivery in those days in India. And I said, basically, I don't know everything that I may have said. I said, Dear Meher Baba, I was already convinced as to who he was. I did not know how to define what he was, but I knew who he was, the authority. I said, I have your book, God Speaks. It has great meaning for me. I want to meet you, and I don't think that's impossible. And believe me, I didn't have 2 nickels. I was just starting out. My wife was teaching. And I knew what I was saying. I want to meet you, and I don't think that's impossible. So I received his reply. And then a second letter. He told me who to contact, that he would be in New York the following May, was it? May? Yeah. I don't know. New York, who to contact. Second letter. Your connection with me is of long duration. You're one of the fortunate ones. That sort of thing. Well, that didn't sound strange to me because you see, I'm dealing with values now. Just as we all are. So that was the beginning of my writing to him, writing to him, writing to him. And I was curious about any number of things, but when I wrote to him, I was always trying to find the way to say what should be said to this person. Praise. I was clumsily trying to be the greatest poet I could be. I was not a poet. Baba commented, and I would get replies from him, then occasionally a cable. He referred to that in the cabin, lagoon cabin here in 1958. He said, it didn't resonate the way I would liked it. He said, such love letters from a lawyer. You know, Baba, just say such love letters. Forget And see, early on, I realized that with all of my limitations, I did know that the fact that he existed was everything. He existed. All of my baggage was still there. But the fact that he existed, you only say what should be said to this existence. I was trying to be equal to that expression. It was a very difficult thing for me. But I used to write on legal pads. He referred to the legal pads. So, and then I read, I got the discourses, the original discourses, and I did all of these things, and then I was practicing law, and I really didn't care for practicing law, but I was a lawyer. And it was, well, I don't know what, I did not really know what I would be satisfied doing. Yeah, I found the most important thing, but you have to live, you have to make a living, and you have to do, once you're into whatever work you're trained for, you have to do it. But Baba made a difference, you see. The things that I didn't like to do, he made it easier for me to do. I never wanted to be, when the time came to pick a substitute judge, part-time judge in those days, back in the 60s, I had a good friend who was politically very active. And I said to who shall we support? And he was a good friend of mine. He became a political important person. He said, you. I said, me? I had no idea. So I ended up being a substitute, and then later on I became a full-time judge. But when the opening for a full-time judgeship came, the person that was the judge resigned so he could run for Congress. And so this friend of mine immediately came to me, and he said, by that time my practice was going okay. And when I sat in court, it wasn't that great an experience. It was a big honor in those days to be a substitute judge. But in my mind, I was thinking, being there in court every day, all day long, it was not that attractive. It was a big. So he came over trying to convince me. I said, John, well, my practice is going all right. I said, I don't know if I can want that every day. No matter how you feel, you got to be in there. And he kept arguing. He said, you ought to give, no, it's a big opportunity. We'll go after it, da, 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 da. And then he said, besides, you'll have more time to do these Meher Baba talks. When he said that, I said, well, okay, I'll give it a try. And so that was the beginning. Well, all the difficulties, I went through many, many difficulties. I was investigated by the FBI because of these strange meetings I had at my house. I was, and the person that was somebody that had some influence because he had money in New York, got the State Department to investigate Meher Baba. And then the FBI person, when they send out, they have to check into what they're assigned to check out. So he goes to my 6'7" friend, mean-looking person, straight as an arrow, but mean. He was a city attorney at that time. He later became a circuit judge, but he was also a very powerful person in the legislature in Virginia. Anyway, the FBI person goes to him, and he goes to him. I better get to what I want to tell you. And anyway, he's listening to the FBI person. He has these meetings or whatever, so. Then God knows what he told the city attorney about why I was to be checked into. I don't know what was told to that FBI person. When I heard about it, I was thrilled. I thought I'd become a martyr. And that was really what I wanted. The straight and narrow was a little difficult. I'm going to go out like a blaze. And so my friend opens his desk drawer in the city attorney's office. He pulls out a series of Baba's statements. He says, here, read, this is good stuff. He had Baba's. So the FBI guy apologizes. He says, look, he said, we just signed it. He said, I'm sorry it bothered you. And that was the end of it. So I had to go back to the straight and narrow. Anyway, my entire experience was to try to, well, when we went to India in 1962, one of the most important things I heard Baba say was, you all have been children in my love. You must go home and find where I really exist. My abode is the heart of my lover. Well, those are nice words, but I didn't have the opportunity to live with him. So you have to take his words. First of all, I know who he is. He's saying these things to me. He says he resides in my heart. I have to make that a reality. Why? Because he didn't send for me over to India. Although he did say to Kecha in 58, because I used to be in anguish about not knowing about him in 1954 when the men had him all to themselves over there. And I knew that there was no question in my mind about what I was doing. Bob was beaming, but I just did. I wasn't even thinking about anything. I was in a state of bliss, but I went through hell first. And so one of the things back and forth between Kecha and him, she said, Baba, she told him about my anguish of not knowing in 1954, not being in there in 1954 for the 3 incredible weeks. You know how Baba is. He says to her, well, he didn't know about me then. Is that the way Baba is? He didn't know about me then. I didn't hear about it until 1955. Anyway, he said, besides, had he come, he would not have returned. And I wanted him in the United States. Well, that sounds nice, okay? But is that a spiritual experience? No. Baba said a lot of things that should make me feel good egotistically, or when you're down in the dumps. But is that the experience? No, absolutely not. The experience is Baba's presence. And that's the work we have to do. Because I've done a little of that work. I tried to struggle to put him first every moment. It is the hardest thing in this world. Not only for me, for any of you. But there's no other way. I use all of the rationale. I read everything that I can. Because it lifts you up. But being lifted up is not the experience. It is not the experience. Almost 100% of our thinking is negative. We have the absolute need to have the greatest assistance that exists every single moment. Because we're thinking, if we're awake, every single moment. And most of that thinking has to do with having the emotion of your vulnerability. We are vulnerable because we identify with creation, notwithstanding the fact that our reality is the same as Baba's reality, soul. It is soul in us that makes us see the greatness in him to the extent that we can see. It's soul in us that makes us see beauty. It's soul in us that makes us optimistic. I was always an optimist, although everything bothers me. I'm always an optimist. It was why? Because why does everything bother me? The same reason it bothers you. We look for results, do we not? And what does Baba say about results? Leave the results to me. Do the best you can. But try to resolve all problems and difficulties, but leave the results to me. Are we doing it? We're trying. Is it a struggle? Baba would say absolutely. When do I quit, by the way? I've got a few.
Just keep going. We'll have 2 hours.
Yeah. So when Baba said, "You have been children of my love" in 1962, you must go home and find me where I really exist. That became a real thing for me. And I tried very hard to make his presence a reality. Did I do enough? Absolutely not. And that would be said by people who lived with him. But I knew that was the way to do it. You can look at it this way. It is the hardest thing in the world to try to remember him. How can you possibly obey him if you don't remember him? So just remembering him is difficult from moment to moment. If you remember him, don't forget, you are his devotees, devoted lovers. So am I. If we remember him, we have a reason. And what is that reason? That reason is our heart. Our hearts, if we love Baba, if we admire him, if he is the ultimate, meaning that we can perceive. Don't forget, perception is not only intellect, it's intuition, and far beyond what we can perceive. That is love. Conviction is every great positive word, admiration, adulation. The first word I said to Baba when I first saw him at the Delmonico, with my arms around him, and I said in his right ear, "I adore you. I adore you." And I meant it. That came from my heart. I didn't know what to do to bring to earth my adoration. That was for years to come. Put me before self is the way I put it now. But you can't put Baba before self if you don't remember him. See, it is very different, everybody in this room, when you remember him, it's very different from the greatest academic remembering him. They might read a book. You are his. Oh, what a difference that is. You and I are pieces of, where is that? Where is Judy? You and I are pieces of Baba's broken down furniture. And that is the most exalted thing anybody can possibly be. When Baba himself says, "I come for the few." But because it is an avataric advent, everything that he does on every level of evolution is to push those levels to what? The higher levels. But on the human level, he awakens the heart. And his lovers, they are rare. It is the most difficult thing in the world to remember him every moment, but that's our work. Believe me, you have got the key. I've got the key in my hand. And when you apply it, before I come down here, what do you think I do? Who was it? Who asked me to speak down here? Was it Dennis? Somebody. Anyway, I know I'm going to end up speaking down here or wherever else I go. What do? I try to make a stronger effort to feel Baba's presence, so that when I tell you something, I'm telling you from my experience. Because my experience is just like your experience. My dilemma is the same as your dilemma. We admire the greatest thing in creation, and we're struggling to do something about it. While the world is a mountain on our back, that mountain becomes lighter and lighter by simply remembering him. But if we don't try to do that, we don't experience that lightning. I've had many difficult experiences. He carried me through. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I knew I could not abandon him. I mean, it was a nightmare. I had to face this or face that or face the other thing. But I knew I could not do it. But it wasn't easy for me. He made it possible for me. Every time. Like a whole city ready to blow up based upon something I am refusing to do. It's difficult to make your friends feel disappointed because they want one thing from you. But you have no choice when you're following this. We get to the point where we become more tactful in all our relationships, regardless of the work we do. We become more, as Baba said, in the direction of making our lives his message of love and truth. We're not preaching. I recoil from that kind of thing, as we see so many people do. Baba wants us to feel his presence, and then our words are Baba. If they're meaningful. When Baba says, I am perfectly capable of doing my work myself, does that mean it's not going to be hard? And of course it's going to be hard. But he will do that. He can stand anything. But he gives us the opportunity, and we are equipped to do that because we have conviction. Conviction, there is no way that we can say the greatness of having conviction of that which is real, the God-man himself. There is no way. There are no words. The experience has to come. And the experience is, if I have a thought that's negative, and that's every moment. If I have a thought, as you have a thought, every moment that's negative, we have to do the work of putting Baba first. I dreamt one night, I was pouring out my heart to Baba. I said, Baba, my life is a desert. And Baba said to me, my dear Henry, I am the desert. See, what is the desert? The desert is we're attached to illusion. So we're looking for God in illusion. We're looking for happiness. We're looking for the relief from boredom. We're looking for eternity. We're looking for invulnerability where it doesn't exist. And to change from that, when we have lived that for how many lifetimes? Without the intervention of the God-man or perfect master, it's 8,400,000 human lifetimes. I'm satisfied that we didn't have to go through that much. But that's what he said. Without the intervention of God, you have 8,400,000 human lifetimes before you become supersaturated with what? Disillusionment with every joy, with every happiness, with everything that creation can give you. You reach the apex of disillusionment because you know that's not what you're looking for. But you have to go through those experiences. It takes that many lifetimes, Baba said, before you make the turn and go the direct journey. That's where we are now. But Baba said the goal is divine love. We are on the direct path. And by that I mean when he said in 58, you're veiled, Henry. You're veiled. We're all veiled. To me, what that means is, now this is my opinion, what it means is he puts the sanskaras so that he can do his work through us. And when we indulge ourselves, when we don't remember him, what does Baba do? He has to wait. Don't you see? But what is more poignant, we have to suffer. Indulging in self is suffering. When I feel for him from the heart, from time to time, it used to come automatically, but I didn't know Baba then. I didn't know him consciously then. But that feeling I found, it was love. But you know, love is such a cheap word. I love broccoli. Whatever. You know, that's Baba himself says, if you really love me, you wouldn't even think of love. How are we drawn to him? We can recognize those things in him that are so magnificent. Why do we recognize them? Why do we come to the conclusion they're magnificent? Because we are magnificent. But we're not living it. We're not experiencing it. That's what he wants for us. My wish. Baba says, my will, nothing will interfere with. My wish is that you make my will your will. How do we do it? We put him first. No, I'm not finished suffering, Baba. I'm enjoying it. I have the most exquisite ability to backbite. I can find invidious comparisons where I'm better than everybody else. I align myself with people who are similarly inclined. Their level of ignorance is equal to me. On and on and on and on. And we got the key in our hands. Does it mean we have to become... Listen. Remember, Baba says, Asceticism is not it. You know what asceticism is? It's done for the ego. Look, I'm on a diet. My name is Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, and I'm down to 3 grains of rice a day. I've beat every one of the people in this monastery. But Baba said, asceticism. As we look at a person who is that disciplined, we're going to say he's got something I don't have. Well, discipline is a wonderful thing if you use it for the purpose of creation, which is what? To experience infinite bliss forever. I'm sorry, that's your destiny. You can hold on to your misery and your unhappiness, your anger, greed, selfishness, as long as you want to, but ultimately, your destiny is to experience infinite bliss for all eternity. I wrote this down because it resonated. This is very, very close to my heart. What Baba awakens in me and in all who would love and obey Baba, that includes us. There are 2 ways to suffer. The first is to remember Baba, say Baba's name, and surrender to Baba's will. The second is to remember self. Baba's wish is that I, and also you, that I struggle to put Baba before self. What happens when I do this? What happens is Baba takes complete control of all, so that no matter what happens, all that happens is Baba's will. And all results are for the purpose of bringing me directly to Baba. I am convinced 100% of that for all of us. That is real surrender. Giving up the self for Baba is real suffering. In '58, Baba was the most important fact of my existence, and I knew about it. And that was a very special thing, notwithstanding all the other difficulties, problems, and whatever it was that I and each of us had to face. That was the most significant thing. I came to Myrtle Beach. He sees each one. And from that point after I saw him, for him, in my mind, I did not exist. He called everyone. He called groups. He called this person. He called that person. I'm eating away inside. I had letters from him, cables. I knew who he was. And I was trying to reconcile this most extreme dilemma. That one who was everything to me didn't want to see me. And after the agonizing period of time, I don't know how long it was, that I went through trying to resolve it honestly, I came to the resolution of it because I had no choice. And the resolution was, Mayor Baba is God. His will should be my will. But after that long period of agony, I was looking for every other resolution other than surrender. And when I came to that, because I had no choice, I knew he was God. He didn't want to see me. That should be my will. And it was my will. And I tell you, I have never experienced up until that moment anything as magnificent as that. Had he said, I'm going to give you God realization tomorrow, nothing would have been more important than my surrender. That's what we have to do every moment. When Henry has a thought, or Adele has a thought, that's an unpleasant thought. Henry and Adele, and also you, Judy. Every one of us has the opportunity, and we have the duty, because we have been given the gift of conviction. We do not earn, there's nothing you can do to earn the conviction from God. I remember one of the things I tried to say in one of those yellow page letters to Baba. I don't remember, but this main point, I searched for him I searched for you everywhere. And I left everything and everyone behind. And then alone, naked in the desert, I knew I could not find you, and you found me. It's his conviction that he has given to each one of us. It is what we do with it that is important in order to gain the experience of taking this mountain of illusion and unhappiness that the world can never give you. Only the feeling of Baba, who is always there. Always there. That's a thrill for me to think. Like, I can't sleep hardly ever at night. So I keep repeating his name. And I'll get up and walk around. I'll come back. I think, I'm going to get back to bed and think about his name. Because I know he's here. See, I'm not saying, Baba, I want to experience you. I'm just repeating his name. Baba said something one time somewhere for all of us. Just remember me, say my name. Try to obey me. Try to love me. It is so simple. You don't have to figure me out. You can't anyway. You're already there. I've given you the gift of conviction. How many of them, almost 6 billion people in the world, have a conviction that God exists? It's a rarity. We have to wake up to how fortunate we are. And how do we do it? Every ugly moment in your life, every difficult thing that you don't want to face it, not for discipline, face it for Baba. Baba says, when you try to do these things that you don't particularly want to do, it is vital that you make the effort. No, he says, you must try to resolve that difficulty, that problem. But, and this is the important point, but it is vital that you do it. You try to do it for me. Otherwise, you're doing it for the ego. Don't you see? It's the ego that enslaves us. That's the matrix of our experience through illusion. And that's the prison. And now we know, we're convinced because we've been given the gift of conviction. Baba doesn't wait 1 second. When a person arrives at the place where that gift of conviction will fructify and bear fruit, it doesn't wait 1 second. That's what he's here for. Look at the vastness. One of the other ideas that is so true. Look how vast. When Baba says, gives you an idea, and as physicists give you an idea of the vastness of this creation, and all of that creation is in your consciousness. You are bigger than all of that. And the little eye that sees everything, Baba says, look how little the eye is. It's because the soul is looking through the eye. And what is the soul? It is your identity with that God-man itself. If we don't remember this, it's difficult to remember because our journey has been identifying with physical existence. And that journey has been forever. And yet, we have to be encouraged by realizing in this one lifetime, which happens to be the most important advent of all previous avataric advents. Baba said this. Every advent is connected with the previous one. We've reached our highest plateau. And Baba uses it for the intellect to explain something. We will go on a massive scale from reasoning to intuition. Of course we have intuition. Awareness is spirituality. We must take the time. Let me finish this. What happens is Baba takes complete control of all, so that no matter what happens, all that happens is Baba's will. And all results are for the purpose of bringing me directly to Baba. When I say me, I'm talking to myself. I mean you too. That is real surrender. Giving up the self for Baba is real suffering. Now, what about making others happy? Can I make others happy? I can only think of Baba and try to help, but I can never make others happy. Their happiness also depends on their love for God. And their love for God must become honest and sincere. Love for self is illusion. And since illusion is infinite, loving self becomes infinite. And suffering is 99% unnecessary. So what do I do? This is important. I already have come to God. We already have come to God in human form. So what happens now? I continue to put the human form of God before all. That's why we have to remember Him first. What happens then? That human form of God, known as Meher Baba, becomes my and your constant companion. And the final realization of His presence, that's what we want. And the final realization of His presence makes me and all who would love and obey like steel in His love. My life and our lives have come, and my life and our lives will go. But where will they go without Baba? They will come and go without purpose because they are focused on self. But with Baba, every special one who would love and obey Baba continues to struggle to focus on Baba. And it is that struggle that brings each special one directly to Baba. That is our work. That is our work. And Baba said somewhere, it is so simple, no one believes it. Okay? You try it for a week or a month, I'll do the same thing. You will know something, I will know something. Every moment, you're releasing your consciousness from the addiction. The greatest addiction in the world is illusion. But what a magnificent purpose it served. It gave us explicit consciousness, and with that explicit consciousness, we now turn around. And as we turn around to face the source of that consciousness, we go through all the planes, but unconsciously, Baba veils us. You get on the first plane, you think you're there. It makes such a drastic difference between the gross consciousness. You turn. Baba's tapping us on the shoulder. With all the millions or thousands or hundreds of thousands of human lifetimes, no one has ever done this before. I didn't know there was any direction except illusion, creation. And this happens. His intervention, conviction. I turn to see who tapped me on the shoulder. And I go through all the planes. And I come turn all the way around and I see who's tapped me on the shoulder. The God-man himself. That's what he is doing. But with Baba, every special one who would love and obey Baba continues to struggle to focus on Baba. And it is that struggle that brings each special one directly to Baba. Each must take responsibility for himself or herself. And each must do this honestly and sincerely. You couldn't do it for the ego. You have to do it for Baba. Now, what responsibility comes first? Being responsible to love and obey Baba always comes first. Then comes honesty to those who are close to me. What is this honesty? To let go and let each be responsible directly to Baba or God. Each must find their own path. Each must find their own happiness. And each must know they can only depend on Baba or God for their happiness. When I share a thought or an experience with another, without dependence on any other expectation from the other or others, is to be free of self. To be completely free is to realize one's own limitations while sharing a thought or experience with another. No one is completely right about what they think they know. Only God is 100% right. I know I do not experience infinite knowledge, infinite power, and infinite bliss. To be true to oneself, one must be, to be true to oneself, one must be true to Baba. He is yourself. When I was in Los Angeles, you know what I said, Adele? I said, I was recounting the Wilmington experience when we all left in '58 to go to Wilmington when he was going to take the plane to Australia. And this was a beautiful incident that I didn't realize actually happened until afterwards. So we get to Wilmington Airport, and Bob is seated at the base of one of the marble pillars, and everyone from the center, I don't know how many there were, they were all encircled around him. You couldn't see Bob, nor could you even see Erich, who was speaking, who was standing. But you could hear his voice, but there were endless rows of circles around him. So I wasn't there. I was over there talking to Bill Donkin. And then, of course, it occurred to me, I was hearing. But I said, I should be over there, whether I see him or not. So I went over and I knelt down outside the outside circle, and I was listening to Erich speak. And I looked up, and then right in front of me, there was like this space. No one was seated. And it went right to Baba, and Baba turned his head, blew me a kiss. I didn't realize what had happened until afterwards. There was no space there. Many of us, if we do the struggle to remember Baba and all the difficult moments that all of us face, Baba will show. He will show his presence from time to time. He's the one that knows when we need it. Know that we don't expect the result. Never expect the result. Leave the results to him because he said so, and he's the one that we have conviction about. And the one thing that he wants is to give you an eternal bliss as fast as possible. But the point is, we are never alone. That's the greatest thing in the world. We are never alone. He is the only reality that is consciously there every moment. That's a thrill. When I read from, that's the way it was, Erich. When Erich described, he didn't think about philosophy, he didn't think about God when he was with him. He said, when you were around him, the way he described just being around him, it was so incredible. That's the way he looked at me. That's the way Baba looked when I first saw him in '56. That's the way he looked. Okay. So Baba says in '62, you must go home and find me where I really exist. Is he here physically? What did Baba say all the time the night before he dropped the body to bow? Remember, I'm not this body. Remember, I'm not this body. How many times has he said it? You have no idea, Baba says, how low I have to stoop to come and visit you. He does all of that so we can get a glimpse that he exists. But more than that, that's for the select few. That's this group here, and the people that happened to see him physically. I knew about him and felt about him before I saw him. I'd never seen him. And so, as a matter of fact, other than that one experience in the lagoon cabin, where I was really, really experiencing something, I felt his love when he was not around. He's formless. Form is illusion. Our form is illusion. Thank God. So, when I was in England, I gave a talk over at Divius. Was there a group there? And I had all these wonderful things that I really struggled to write down. They came from the heart, articulated by my mind. They were sound things. And Delia kept interrupting me. Say, Henry, tell me about your experiences. And I'd say something about the little bit of time I had. And I'd go back, Henry, tell me more about your experiences. And I finally said, Delia, I didn't have all the time with them that you had. I said, I'm struggling to find his presence the way he said it. It's hard. You around that man, you can tell magnificent stories. I want to find the magnificent stories of surrendering to him, which is very hard. I'll take the easy way anytime. I wanted to go to India. Oh, by the way, when Bob was doing all that talking back and forth with Keecha in '58, He said, she said to him, Baba, Henry wants to go to India with you. He said, what will you do if I take him? She said, well, I'm coming too. And then Vidyard was standing behind. She said to me afterwards, what a nonsense thing, she said. Well, yes, Baba, they will go sightseeing in India while you babysit or something. I said, why would you say something like that? And then of course, when Baba said to Keisha, whom do you love more, Henry or me? You know that. She said Baba said to Keisha, whom do you love more, Henry or me? And she immediately responded by saying, it is because of you that I'm able to love Baba. I love Henry. Actually, that really didn't sound that bad at that time. But Baba really, he literally got up almost got out of his seat. He reached forward and pulled her to him. She said, I don't know where that answer came from. He must have put it there. And there was another time before Baba, I had a very tragic situation. My oldest brother died. And my mother, we lived in Richmond, Virginia. My mother was told about this psychic that lived in Richmond. And she was a very fine woman. She never charged money. She worked for the biggest department store in Richmond, which was called Miller and Rhodes. She was a very close friend of the owner, Webster Rhodes. And she was consulted from time to time by Franklin D. Roosevelt, who would send one of his assistants down. By the way, he came through to her and he said, after what I am experiencing now, the greatest difficulty I had while I was president is absolutely nothing. That's what she said. But now she referred to me as she said, you have a very unusual son. But she didn't say whether it was good or bad. And she said, but she did say something, this was before Baba now. She described Baba, she said, there is someone standing always with you. He's standing behind you. She described Baba in his white sadra, his mustache, everything, the dog, completely. And it wasn't until long after Baba that I remember, like Elizabeth, Baba saying in 32, keep this flower, write down the date, one day you'll know its meaning. And it wasn't until years after the accident that she found the little New Testament and found it in there. So you forget those things. The most important thing is, if Baba were to talk to any one of his pieces of broken down furniture, any one of us, he would tell you these things, because you don't come to Baba with conviction unless, in my opinion, unless you've had long relationship with him. He just happened to say it to those who might have been here or there. But again, those things sound nice, but that is not the work. The work is to do what you have conviction that enables you to do, and me to do, which is to put him first, and that is the hardest work in the world. But believe me, as I said to somebody, I said, Baba, how much do you pay me to work for you? And he said, I give you no salary, but the fringe benefits. I make jokes about Baba. I said, I tell this person who's a businessman, I want to say Baba things without putting labels. I said, I talk to God from time to time. And he's a nice person, so he'll hear me all right. And I said, the last time I talked to God, he told me all these marvelous things about myself. He says, that's the good news. Now the bad news. I said, what possibly could be, after what you've just told me, what could be the bad news? Baba said, no one will ever know it except you and me. You see what the ego is? I want to know the green eye. You know how close I am to Baba? Look, you can honestly say, no one is closer to Baba than I am. I just don't think about it. And that's what Baba wants me to do. He wants me to think about it. No one is closer to Baba than anyone else. We're fortunate. We know about it. But we want to experience that closeness. Believe me, his face does change in the picture when you're thinking about it. He does smile at you. What did Baba say? I'm the mirror. If your state of mind is all confusion, you're going to look at my face, you're not going to see me. I used to try to figure out how I could look at Baba's face. I'm looking at his eyes, And I noticed I'm not seeing him because of thoughts. You have a good reason to get rid of thoughts. It's not a mechanical thing. The prison of the mind stands between us and our own reality, which is sublimely visible during this avataric advent, as well as present. everything he said. I remember we talked about all of these different things that have never been revealed before, that makes the whole basis of the purpose of creation a magnificent, graspable something. But in 58, in the barn, Baba holds up God Speaks and says, who understands this? And then he answered his own question. He said, I don't understand it myself. When he said, I have come not to teach, but to awaken. Understand, therefore, that I lay down no principles or precepts throughout eternity, etc. These things, the mind is so intellectual today. He has given more to satisfy that mind, so we can turn from the mind to the heart, where Baba exists. What I can say from my own experience is that in my struggle to try to remember him the best way I know how, and put him first the best way I know how, and I improve on that. We all will as we apply ourselves. Everything that when I read Baba's biographical material, when I read Baba's own magnificent statements explaining the real purpose of all of that material, including his life, the real benefit is you have an extraordinary reason to think about him. It is not necessary to understand. We are already there. You could become the greatest giant in terms of intellectual capacity that ever existed, and you'll not find Baba there. It's love. It's the forgetting of self. The intellect can articulate. As one Baba said one time, the heart dictates policy. The mind carries it out. But the heart has got to be there. So when you have the many, many occasions that we all have to deal with a negative thought, remember dramatic things don't often happen. Dramatic things don't often happen, but the negative thoughts are there all the time. We have the greatest reason in the world to struggle to remember Baba. It's never mechanical. Just repeat his name. Repeat his name. Repeat his name. Repeat his name. Look at his picture, whatever appeals to you, but the focus is the God-man himself. Because the mind will quiet. The mind will quiet. That is the new habit that Baba wants us to have. He very generously refers to all of the negative qualities that we have developed in our evolutionary journey, in our reincarnation process, to get to the point where we are now. As the old habit. That's all. He doesn't make it anything big, it's an old habit. Make your new habit putting me first. Let me finish this and get to one last thing. To be true to oneself, one must be true to Baba, because Baba is your self. And that's when I told you before, I made reference, Adele, in California, once I got to Wilmington, and in Wilmington, another significant thing, he said, beautiful words, but no experience. He said, isn't it wonderful? I never leave you. Well, I've come a long way from that experience, as we all have. So when I was in California, I said, Baba said, isn't it wonderful? I never leave you. Do you know why he never leaves you? Because he is you. And don't you see we're carrying around Baba all the time, consciously from moment to moment? And where are we? Consciously. That's the thrill. What a thrill. The thrill that the vastness of creation, with billions of galaxies, trillions of light years, concepts ungraspable, was necessary to produce a tiny little thing like Jeff Wolverton and Henry Kashouty and each of you. Because alone in that form, that vastness had to get all the way down to this explicit consciousness, because that consciousness will then take the journey to experience its own godhood. That's magnificent. Everything that Baba says, the thrill is fine. His words are magnificent. But who is saying it? Look who's saying it. And he is accessible to each one of us, every moment. That's the thrill. When I was young, I said, whatever the truth is, have to include everybody. I can't be one religion is the right one and the other is wrong. It's ridiculous. So even a kid could recognize that. I can't. If I was in heaven, I knew somebody was suffering in hell as stupid and as selfish as I am, I wouldn't be happy in heaven. I mean, all of these, we're there. We're there. Baba's saying, you are already there. Do the work. And what is the work? Put me first. What does put me first? Put me before self. And one other thing, I got this right. I and all who would love and obey Baba must rid ourselves of self and depend on Baba for everything. And since you and I are not responsible for the happiness of others, let them come to Baba in their own time and in their own way. If I wish to help others, I must let them be on their own. But I must know without any doubt that Baba is in complete control of all that happens. And I must know that to help others, I must give up self and love Baba more. And then I put down here, I'm not going to finish there, but I've got one other thing, and that is, in 62 in India, Baba said we must write him when we return. Okay. Well, I kept that on my mind. I kept that on my mind. I wanted to find the words of the greatest poet in the world. I wanted to find what I could say that excluded everything of my illusory self, and I could never do it. And so I kept postponing and postponing. And then one night, or a weekend, my wife was up in Williamsburg with her parents, and I get this telephone call from Fred Winterfeld. He said, Henry, I just heard from Baba. He said, where is Henry's letter? So that night, it thundered, it rained like it had never rained, lightning, it poured down, and I was able finally to just write something without any difficulty. And this is what it is. You may have seen it when I gave it to Hermes. And this came from my heart. Beloved, my words to you, O my beloved, cannot be purer than I am, and my heart aches. O poet, I have no words for you, and my dumbness is like stone that tries to cry out before you pass. I have no eyes to see you, and my tears find no escape. These brutish hands hold no gift for the child of light. Oh, magic Baba, would you tell Baba I love him? Would you look at him for me? Will you carry a gift to him for me? I am yours for eternity, Henry. And Baba said, Adi told me, it was read to him and Baba put his hand on his heart. So Baba finally helped me get that letter off to him. So I would only say in closing, we are the most fortunate people that exist. We must realize our good fortune by doing the work. We are, in fact, because of the conviction Baba has given us, we are his eyes, his ears, his voice. Every thought, as Adele was reminding me, the prayer of repentance, I think about it differently now. And it's coincidental because I just started thinking differently. Sometimes we say it mechanically. We repent, O God, most merciful, for all our sins. We're familiar with our sins. For every thought that we repent, O God, most merciful, for our sins. For every thought
Those false are just
unclean. For every word. See, I'm thinking. For every thought, I'm thinking how many thoughts I have. And I can counteract it by immediately thinking of Baba, saying his name, whatever way you want to do it. For every thought, word, and deed. For every wish that pain befall others, you know, all this. Oh, in your unbounded mercy. See, you're directly, where is he? Did he not say, I'm closer than your own breath? Where is he? Don't you see? We're absent, he's not. And our gift of conviction will make this next year, because we're all going to do it, aren't we? I'm reminding you and I'm reminding myself. We all do that. When you're down, help somebody. When you're down, I'll help you. When I'm down, you help me. There's only a way that you can. Life is so temporary. It is so temporary, but it's so magnificent because it is only in the physical body that we can realize what is not God. Creation will not fail to bring you to God because that's what it's for. Creation will make us understand what is not God. All the gifts of creation can never satisfy us because we are one with God. And God wants us consciously for all eternity to be one with Him. That is our destiny. That is our birthright. So every human being is a magnificent creation. And we have to keep that in the front of our minds. That's the difficulty. Don't watch the television too much.